Hi, I'm Jason Katims, and I am the showrunner for Amazon's show As We See It. And today I'm here for Inside the Writer's Room with As We See It with the incredible writing staff of As We See It. So if you don't know the show, just by way of quick description, this is a show about three young adults who are on the spectrum, who are roommates together, and their experiences in life. The tone is kind of is a comedic drama or a dramatic comedy. We argue about this a lot in the room about which one it is, but it's one of those two. And it's a show that I'm so proud of. I hope if you haven't seen it, you would watch. It's I think a very delightful and also very moving show. And today we get the opportunity to talk to the writers. So many times, when you see panels on shows, it's often the showrunner who is the person who is speaking, for the writers. And so I'm very excited to be the person not speaking, asking the questions. And when I'll quickly introduce our writing staff, and then I will, and then from there we'll just jump in. So we have Ian Deitchman, Kristin Robinson, Romi Barta, Michelle Sam, and Jesikah Suggs. Unfortunately, we do not have the other Denise Hahn, who is a wonderful writer and and made an incredible contribution to season one. Fortunately, wasn't able to join us today, but everybody else is here, and I'm excited to jump in. So the first thing I wanted to kind of ask you guys about, and feel free to jump in, and if you don't, I'll just put you on the spot. But this is sort of for everybody. I wanted to kind of ask about before you got into the room, when you first got, I believe it was, you got the pilot episode and the pilot script, and that's really probably all you had to go by. Maybe some of you saw the Israeli version that was based on. But I wanted to know, what was it that made you feel, how did you kind of get connected to the material? Like, what made you, what was your sort of way in? Was the story personal to you in some way? And if it wasn't personal to you in some way, how did you find your way in to make it something that you could write about? So anybody who wants to jump in and start, just kick it off. Ian.
Okay.
Knew that was coming.
No. Well, I mean, first of all, it was I had an emotional reaction to the pilot. I mean, like, I totally cried. The fact that you made me cry over a Roomba was honestly so great. So, like that.
Well, I am a Roomba owner, by the way. So it was not, that was just something I made up. I mean, the Roomba was, yeah.
Yeah, my dogs would not deal with a Roomba, so we're not allowed. But it was, so I just reacted on. Also, I knew how, Kristin, my writing partner, Kristin, and I have obviously worked with you on previous shows. We both knew how personal it was to you. Now I've learned, since the show has gone, I have a couple of relatives who are on the spectrum. I knew of one at the time, and so it was personal in that way. But really, it was just connecting with the humanity and the tone, the comedy, and the stuff that you write that we love working on with you. The teasing out those small moments, making them real.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been working with Ian and Kristin, by the way, who are our team, and I've been working with them since Parenthood. Yeah. So it's been on many shows. So it's been a long, storied, mostly decent history.
You saved our lives. But other than
that, Ian, when you were saying the thing about having a relative and that who's neurodiverse, and then finding out about another one during the process. I immediately just sort of wonder, did it working on the show, you know, change your understanding of your relatives at all? Did that have any effect on how you saw them?
You know, it gave me insight, I think, into, yeah, I think it gave me deeper insight into their emotional lives to some degree. And also my aunt, who is an ABA therapist and has been working for, you know,
Yes.
30 plus years in
Right.
this field. You know, she was an incredible resource to Kristin and
Yeah,
I.
to you guys, but to all of us. Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, being able to kind of talk to her about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, definitely, you know, it was stuff that we had touched on and talked about in Parenthood when we were writing Max. So,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, it was like, it was an even a more wonderful, deeper dive into, you know, these characters who, like, you know, you came to just, it became not about them being on the spectrum, it's just who they were, you
Yeah.
know. That to me would be the revelation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I asked that because one of the things that responses that I've gotten to this show and I to Parenthood as well was from people who had relatives who were on the spectrum, but were neurodiverse in some way, but were not their brother or sister or parent, but was like an aunt or an uncle or a little bit further away. How you know, I've gotten so many responses from people like that where it provided such a way in and an insight for that in that particular relationship. Kristin, what about you?
Okay, well, so I'm a parent, and I think I largely connected with this material in terms of that relationship, right? So my son is 19 now, but was in high school at the time that we started, and thinking about relationships and launching young people into the world of any on the spectrum in any way is a dance and a balance, because you want to support them, but you need to respect them as their own unique individual and nurture that, but be around as a safety net too. And there's so many of those themes in this show. You know, what I so love is each of these, you know, our core three, as we like to call them, have agency, but they also have support from family members who love them as they are and celebrate them for who they are. But also it's very human to want to protect them from the ways in which the world will be more challenging. And the dance that is, right, of fulfilling that parental obligation, but recognizing this uniqueness and celebrating it, all of that, to me was so, what was just such a blessing to be able to write on, because it's just a lot to explore, but it's universal, I think, for any family of any kind. And as Ian said, you know, it's funny, it's dramatic, it's all those things, because life is super messy in that way. And so I gravitated to it for those reasons, really.
Yeah, no, that's great. Before we continue, I realize this is like my first, you know, experience as moderator, and I've already screwed up.
You're doing great.
I was supposed to say,
Yeah.
if you have a question for the panelists, please submit them in the Q&A section, and we'll try to answer a few near the end of the panel.
That's great.
I've said it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else on this question of getting of how you sort of before you came into the room, you know, how you found your way into the characters and into the show?
Michelle, are you gonna?
Yeah, I thought you were gonna go, Romi, because
No, you go first.
Joe.
Yeah, for me, I'm on the spectrum, and at the time before the show, I was around the same age as the lead characters. So for me, I hadn't seen that. I hadn't seen a show that, you know, really showed 3 20-something-year-olds living together at differing levels of the spectrum, as well as a woman of color on the spectrum. It tends to center around white males. So it's really cool to be able to get the unique perspectives. What drew me to the show was I had the pilot, I had the script, and the Israeli version. And at first I was like, whew, like, when it comes to, on the spectrum portrayals, there's a lot of caricatures, as well as infantilization that happened. But really it was when I met Jason and Jenny that I was like, oh, these people get it. They come from a good place, and that there's a sense of social responsibility in the story that they want to tell, as well as Jason's personal connection as well, that made me feel safe, because at times when you're on the spectrum, it's weaponized against you. And, the one thing that Jason always did, as well as everyone in this room, was made me feel safe to share the funny, the awkward, the embarrassing and heart-aching stories that, that I feel contributed to some of the reality of the show.
Thank you. Michelle, that means a lot to me that you feel that way. Honestly, thank you. Romi.
I feel like I've been tracking this show since like it was announced, like even before, like for years almost. I feel like I've been stalking you, Jason. But a little bit.
Talk about that later, yeah.
But my cousin's neurodiverse, and I'm really close with my family. I grew up like a mile away from my cousins, and I just felt like there wasn't a lot of stuff out there, like Michelle was saying, about people who are neurodiverse in their adult lives. And I think you've talked about this, Jason, too. And I was really interested in exploring that. My cousin is in her late 20s now, and I just immediately felt connected to it for that reason. And just the pull of family in the show and the support system. I've spent a lot of time with my cousin's aides as well. So the Mandy character and her relationship to each character, to Violet, Jack, and Harrison, is just so unique and so full of love and so complicated for Mandy as well. So I just was drawn to all the different character dynamics and the humor, because I like funny.
Yeah, well, no, thank you. And I'm glad you brought up, the Mandy character, because that's also a character that was extremely important to me to tell in a really full way, in a three-dimensional way. I have such admiration for people the work that they do is to work with, to support people who are neurodiverse in any way. And that's a respect that I've gained over many, many years now of having a son on the spectrum, and to see like that, their dedication and patience, and, they're so incredible. And I really wanted to, show that with Mandy. And I also thought like that that character provided a lot of great basis for humor, like the idea of her spinning plates. Those morning meetings are some of my favorite scenes in the show, where, she has to kind of like navigate all of these needs and all of these people who are not going to wait their turn to speak, and all of that stuff. And just, and all of these people who sort of just say in a beautiful way, just say what's on their mind all the time. And to watch Mandy sort of navigate that is, I think, one of the things that I find most delightful in the show. Jess Suggs.
Yes. Well, I feel mine's a little different, because I was, as you know, your assistant when you first got the original series. And so I remember really distinctly I had the pleasure to take each episode and sort of do a breakdown of what happened in each episode. And I remember watching in the original series, the episode where the Violet character, Zohar, was in the car with a man who was like taking advantage of her. And I got through the whole episode before like remembering that I was supposed to be doing a job and taking notes. But it was like that devastating moment of her so wanting this thing, and so wanting like love, and to be like cherished in a way she thought it was supposed to go, and to have this relationship work out, but it to be taken advantage of and to be used in a way that was in part because she was neurodiverse, but in part just because she was like a young woman in the world who wanted this thing and people wanted to misuse it, was a moment that I really connected to, just in terms of like resonating with that feeling, and like knowing, just like getting to be like a young woman who wants this, but is it okay to have it, or can you get it? And then knowing, I remember watching it and like emoting like you, Ian, I'm just like emoting, but then also knowing like you, Jason, and picturing you writing this and adapting this and being so excited to get to be a part of that, just because I knew what great care it would be in. And then, so it was very fun as the season kind of played out to get to watch that moment. I felt like be Violet's whole journey. And so I felt like that's where, to me, that's where I kept coming back to whenever we were pitching, we were doing the room, we were going through sort of going into their mindsets in these like very real, like totally universal moments, but that had an extra tinge to them because they were neurodiverse. That's what was really, I really connected to and thought was so exciting to get to write for and tell.
Right. Well, that's great. And it's actually a great, go ahead, Ian.
Oh, I was just going to say, I also think, you showed us, the rest of us, I think, got to see the Israeli show after we were hired, but before the room started. It was kind of like in prep for the room, watch all the episodes. And I remember that also, just feeling like, this is setting the bar high. Is really good. The Israeli series in and of itself is just a great series. And, that I just remember also being really inspiring. Like, this is going to be really exciting to dive into and to see where we're going to take it. That's all.
Absolutely. So I was wondering now, I wanted to talk about like, once we got into the room, what was the character or storyline that you were most drawn to write about? Was there, one character in particular, one story in particular that you felt once we got into the room that you were particularly, you particularly leaned in and wanted to tell that story?
I'll go.
Great.
I was very drawn to Harrison always from the
I thought you were going
beginning.
to say that.
Yeah, maybe because I pitched a lot of Harrison, but in particular, telling a friendship story for him that could be special and unique to him, that might get misconstrued by the outside world because of the lens they were looking at it through, but that we would come to appreciate through the lens that he's looking through. So sort of his relationship with the younger boy who also lives in the building, and how that kind of pulled him out of his, encouraged him to step out of his, step out and try something new. Out of his comfort zone, and in a way that was very different than Mandy encouraging him to do that. Right? This was a peer. This was a legitimate friend, not a counselor or a.
Yes. I mean, there was so much about that story, Kristin, that I thought was so true, and that it was and also that he was a peer, but he's not a peer the way we normally think about peers, which was ultimately what was sort of kind of tragic about that friendship. That the world, how that looked to the world, made it look not okay. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing. And it's interesting because some people will watch the show and say, like, why are people so, why were people so like, why was AJ's mother so like, intolerant to that relationship or suspicious of it? And but I actually don't think that way. I mean, that's the thing. I understand why she's a single mom. She works, and like, if from her point of view, that relationship wasn't didn't how it looked to her was a legitimate concern, and so that's and ultimately we see that she did see a little bit. She did kind of understand, and see that Harrison was not a bad guy, but it was still something that was hard to sustain. And I really can relate it to that and connect to that, because friendships are hard to come by, I think, for a lot of us, and certainly a lot of us who are neurodiverse, and certainly somebody like Harrison who's neurodiverse, and that friendship can be so precious.
Mhm.
And because that friendship is so precious, and we know it is, it raises the stakes of the story and makes it very moving to watch and delightful to watch. And the thing that was also so true to me about that story is that, you know, how Mandy could talk till she's blue in the face trying to get Harrison to step out the front door. AJ, he's on a bus and going to Van Nuys. And it shows the power of friendship, right? And that's what I thought that story was one of the things that was so beautiful about the story. Who else has somebody that they kind of like, particularly a story or a character that they connected to?
I feel like I immediately connected to Violet. And I mean, just from even in the pilot, like that breakdown at the end that you wrote, Jason, it's just so beautiful. And Sue Ann is so emotional and raw and funny and just wears her heart on her sleeve. And she was just so fun to write for. Like from that moment on, I would say I was just like super excited to write for that character. And I think her wants are so relatable to like everyone just like wants love and, you know, to fit in and to feel seen, and like she can like make her way through the world. And I think just that whole journey for her and her arc was just really special to crack, I thought. And also just that moment, I think it's in Denise's episode in 6, where she's on the couch with Mandy, and Mandy is just like, Julian has totally like, just like, been
Julian.
Yeah, that guy. He's kind of hot though. Anyway. But love a blast.
Wait a second. Are you Violet or? Oh, you're not Violet. You're definitely.
No, I'm good. I just relate heavily. No, but her and Mandy on that couch, like after she's taken the morning after pill, and Mandy just being like, what you went through is normal. It just, we've all been there. It's just really beautiful. So
I love that, all of that too. And one of the things that I found in the show is I feel like we're setting out to tell a coming of age story about neurodiversity, and we ended up telling a coming of age story that it was so relatable. And exactly what you were saying, Romi, you know, so many people have related that to me and Violet's story in particular as totally relatable, neurodiverse or not neurodiverse. And I think that's one of the things that, you know, is powerful about the show, is that it's just about, you know, all the things that people go through at that age, but really that people continue to go through their lives in different ways. And yeah, and it was very, you know, I felt that way too. And, you know, it was Sue Ann was the first audition that I saw of anybody who auditioned for the show was, you know, her self-tape of that scene. And she was so amazing in that scene. And I felt like when I saw that, I was like, oh, this is going to be a pretty, you know, incredible to, you know that the story that and the scenes and the stories and scenes and the episodes that we're writing are going to be, you know, acted by her and of course the other actors we eventually found too. It was really, you know, it was really inspiring, I think, as we were writing. Great. Anybody else have any particular, you know, what was the storyline or character that you know, that you were drawn to?
I would say Jack and Violet. You know, Romi, and you basically said everything for Violet, so I'm not going to be pedantic and say it again. So with the Jack one in particularly, my mother had a stroke a few years back, and then in a weird art imitating life imitating art, a few months after the room ended, she was diagnosed with cancer as well. So it was kind of that dichotomy of what happens when the roles switch in terms of advocacy and being a caretaker. And this type of ways that it manifests and internalizes within a person that's on the spectrum, especially, you know, Jack, and how can we make it active on the screen rather than, you know, it being very interior, which it was, but as well as like manifested in an obsessive ways as we had in the show. So yeah, I would say, you know, those are the two that I think definitely, you know, found my way and related to it. So,
Yeah, that's great. So next question, was there a particular moment or scene or even a line that, like, when you watch the show, now that the show is out there and done, is there something that, what is the thing that you like love the most? Like, is there a particular moment, scene, line, episode that you're like, so, you know, that you just feel like, oh, that's the show, or that's this moment that just delights me?
Well, this goes for the character too. I was just excited that we got a former porn star slash exercise person in there. I mean, that was really all it was about.
You were working hard. There were a lot of
You
pictures.
know, this is why
I
they
shot it down as much as
pay
I
me the
could.
big bucks.
Eventually I caved.
I mean, for me, the sequence that one of the sequences that really moved me, and that I was really happy to see, having gone from pitching in the room to it being written, and then seeing it, was the whole sequence where they go to Santa Monica Pier.
Yes.
And it's honestly, there's no dialogue. To me, it was that sequence of them on the pier and having this kind of, you know, moment where Violet has gone from this like lowest moment at the party to being able to kind of save the evening, is just so emotional. And her connection that she has with Mandy, but then her coming home and looking at all those childish things that she still has in her room.
Yeah.
For me, that moment really landed, and it landed because the direction was great. The music was great. The performances, like, it was so fully realized in every way that I had imagined it in my head in the room and have read it.
Yes.
That was just one that jumped out to me as like, I cheered, you know.
Yes.
Like,
I love that. And we should, since you bring it up, we should acknowledge David Boyd, who is our producing director, who directed that episode, and that sequence is so visually beautiful. And Jonathan Sanford, our composer, whose score is just so beautiful on the show, and that's one of my favorites, if not my favorite sequence. Also, is so wonderful. Anybody else?
I would say there's a moment in the car where Mandy's like waiting for Violet. She's inside somewhere, and I think it was in like one of the promos, but when I watched it, it was so just like moving to me, because it embodied the show of like Jack's like opened up to her about how he got outed, and does everybody know? And it's this emotional moment, and Mandy it's Mandy and Jack, and Mandy tells him like, you're perfect just the way you are, like whenever you're ready to come out, but whoever's going to love you is going to love you. And he like looks at her, and he finally is like, that makes me want to vomit. And it's to me, it's just that like the whole embodiment of like how, like what you're saying, Romi, about at the end, it's funny, but it's also these like heartfelt, very moving moments that then it's like, but Jack's still going to be Jack at the end of it. And like, that was the show to me. And whenever we were going into season 2 and all the things, thinking about it is thinking about that moment and how that to me was like, okay, this is our little landing strip to go on.
Yes.
Well, just to jump in, they're also honest, all of the characters, and I feel like that's like where the humor really lives. And it's almost like, I don't know, sometimes I'm like, I wish I could be that on it. Like, it's so refreshing to like get Jack and Harrison and Violet's like true perspectives on things. And
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Love that too. Great. Anybody else? Going once.
Mhm.
I will add, I love the Jack and Lou relationship.
yes.
From like the moment in the pilot of the pizza scene.
Right.
I just,
So amazing. I mean, Joe Mantegna is
Mm.
so beautiful in that role. And this story is very personal to him as well. And it was really so beautiful. And it was kind of beautiful on and off screen. I mean, there were times when I remember there was a moment where, Rick and Joe they were shooting this scene where they're sitting in a car together and they were, waiting for the camera set up and they were just talking to each other. And, they were still on, I'm still hearing them through the headphones, which we're not supposed to, but it was on. And I remember Rick looking at Joe and just saying, and he said something like, he looked at him like a puppy dog and and he said, I'm just, I just like working with you so much, and it was just like the sweetest moment. Like it was just a real true moment, unadulterated, that you don't normally see, and Joe said, I like working with you too. And it was just so, I don't know, it was like touching to me. It's so like also life, imitating art. It was just so like, it was such a real, true, it was just so real and true. And so many things like that happened on set because of, these actors and the way they embody these roles.
Their dynamic is so kind of specific, the two of them. Like they're for me, they were, I don't know if they're the most fun to write, but they pop. They're the easy, in a way, it's like just the rhythm of their exchanges, I found came really easy on the page. It was just like to kind of parrot and kind of figure out like, no. He says Jack's name a lot. Like it was like that, like, Jack, I'm trying to, and it was so like, no, we need a Jack here. We need a Jack there. That's how he would say it. Like it's just so great to write.
Yeah. So anything like that you thought in the room, you thought, okay, this will actually never work, and you saw it and you're like, oh, that it was like a pleasant surprise, or that worked better than we thought, or oh, that actually landed?
I will just circle back just to make the caveat of saying I always believed in this scene and loved it.
Yes, but yeah, let's hear it. I love it. Let's be honest. Let's get real. Jesse's gonna make it real now.
No, but I remember the pier scene was so impactful and so meaningful. But I remember the cards at first were like, I mean, so long for like how much space was left in this. And I remember, as your favorite sentence to say, Jason, like, oh, that's a writer's problem. I remember being like, good luck, Jason. That's going to be like a 20-page scene unto itself. And so not that I always believed in it, but I was thinking it was going to be about 7 minutes longer than it was. And the efficiency was so much better for it. But yeah, I was worried for you for a minute, but you did it.
Yeah, I'll just say actually the final episode, I remember looking at that and it's like what 95% at the party. And we always talk about like when we were on Parenthood, those big group scenes and where there would be what we would call your classic hinges, your classic hinge where people have a conversation, someone comes in, you hint. This was like, it's like a series, it's a multiple hinges. It's just one giant hinge scene. I was like, all right, that's going to be cool. I thought it was going to be really cool, but it was going to be like the ultimate group scene.
Right.
You pulled it off.
And a hinge scene meaning it's like basically you have one scene and then somebody will walk into that scene, right?
Yeah.
And it'll change, you'll cover another, it's like covering a lot of different stories. In theoretically not, it's really doing more than one scene in a scene is what it really is. Yeah.
I feel like a drama club was also like a hingy kind of scene.
Yeah.
Where like I was like, how are we gonna pull this off? But it's one of my favorites actually. So
yeah,
it was fun to write that drama scene. It was big.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say the scene with Van and Violet with Plan B, that was beautiful. And, you know, and we caught the nuance of like Violet having the agency to want sex, but completely misreading the situation and thinking it's way more serious than what it actually is, and hookup culture, but also a sense that she was, you know, he did kind of know, you know, what he was doing as well. So I think that we lived in the gray and presented it in a way that was so nuanced and gray that it was real life. So I really,
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting, you know, that one scene in particular in that episode was that the scene where they go to the pharmacy to get the pill. And I remember there was a lot of discussion about that scene.
Yeah.
Some scenes are like discussed from like you're in the writer's room, you know, then it's in the outline, we're discussing it, in the script, we're discussing it, then you're in prep, we're discussing it, you're shooting the scene, we're discussing it, in the editing room, there's like, and that was one of those scenes. And like one thing that I sort of came to realize about that scene, sort of honestly, I think a little bit later in the process after the room, when we were prepping the story, was that less is more.
Yep.
That scene was really, nothing happens in that scene, that nothing has to happen. And it's rare for me to say that, because I always am saying that every scene advances the story. It seems like people are just talking, but you never, anybody's just talking. There's never a conversation. It is always, you know, everything is actively moving the story forward. And I realized I had to, in that scene, kind of let go of that, because it was really just about watching these two people in this moment, you know, nothing really happens other than they ask for a pill and they get it. You know, at certain points, I think we had the pharmacist much more arch and much more, you know, whatever. And I realized that it really wasn't getting us anything, because it wasn't really like, the pharmacist is not really evil. Like, he's got a job, you know, he's got a few questions he's kind of supposed to ask. And, you know, and in any case, I really loved that scene. And I love that scene in that it's just, we allow our characters to be in this very real, in this very real moment, without trying to add anything, any false drama to it, you know?
Mhm.
You know what, in that scene, I would say it actually, for me at least, it did further story, in that it was really Van's story for me in that scene, because it's like, she's going through this, it's so terrible for her, and he is feeling so helpless to really protect her, because he has to go through it. And to me, that then led perfectly into watching Mandy be able to completely be there for her in a way that he desperately wants to.
Yes.
So it did feel purposeful to me, but I agree with you. It's like, by just letting it just be what it is, and without having to try to, you know.
Yeah, no, right. And I think it was purposeful and it was effective, but it was like, you know, it was almost pulling back.
Yeah.
It was almost pulling back and letting, almost like watching it like a documentary moment, as opposed to what you normally just, we normally automatically try to do, which is fine, is have a beginning, middle, and end to a scene, have each scene have a, but
and I love the fact with the Mandy scene that followed up afterwards, it was not about the plan B. It's the fact that Violet just wants to be normal, and what she thought was real was not. And the fact that, you know, Mandy was able to say, well, that happens to all of us, whether you're neurodiverse or neurotypical, like, that's normal. And I thought it was really cool with the living and the breathing of the characters.
So I guess the next thing I was going to ask is, do we feel like, was there any story in particular that was like particularly hard to crack, that we felt like we were struggling with? It could be an episode, it could be a scene, it could be a storyline, and, you know, how we kind of like, how we worked through that. What was the, you know, So anything come to mind about what was sort of challenging?
I remember the setting up Mandy, like Mandy in the first few episodes and her story and figuring out how to balance her personal story with our threesome, that
Yes.
was tricky. That was true. That was a lot of, all right, well, what if we what if this piece of the story actually happens earlier? And that, oh, okay, but that, and that was definitely a bit of kind of trying to, give her own personal story. And I think it's probably because it's a season 1 show. We have basically the pilot to go on, and it's really not until you get to the into post that you're really figuring out like the rhythm of the show, what it wants to be, how much time we spend with each character, and how those stories play off each other.
Yeah.
I don't know if this was a room struggle, but when I was writing my episode, I will say like Harrison's parents leaving to go to Montana was like just so emotional for me and really hard to write, because I kept thinking about my family and like what that would be like if I just thought about my aunt and uncle. And I think these stories, like, you dig so deep, they're so relatable in many ways, and it's like it's very different, but at the same time I don't know, it just was like Harrison's mom talking to Mandy in that scene about like her point of view on like wanting, like how she's given up so much. I mean, not given up, but she's had to sacrifice, but it feels so torn about leaving Harrison at the same time, and there's so much love there. Like that specifically was difficult to write.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's tough. That's a tough
I
stuff.
kind of loved how much actually screen time that you ultimately gave the actress who played the mom in that scene. It was actually really, she was amazing in it.
Yeah.
And completely delivered that awesome monologue. It was really emotional.
Yeah. I mean, I felt that, I will say that I feel that one of the things the way that, and you guys know, the way that I try to really approach everything is that there's never any villains,
Yeah.
that we have to understand everybody's point of view in every scene. And to me, I think there were a lot of people who questioned this along the way. You get notes from people, you get feedback, and a lot of people who question that, how could the parents do that, And I never did, and I never thought they were villains to do that. I never thought of them as villains, and I thought that in that scene, when you got to really see what this was costing the mother and what this was like to her, I thought it was so moving. And she at that point became as much, she became a real person. She not just a character, like who was creating kind of an obstacle for one of our characters, but she was a real person. I thought it made the show richer because you get to see all perspectives, you get to understand all the perspectives, even the people who aren't really making the choices that you're hoping they would make, So I wanted to segue into a couple of questions that I'm seeing here. The first one is, let's see. I'm trying to see if there's a name here. Angela Baxter. I'm really excited to see a writer in the writer's room on the spectrum. My son is on the spectrum, and I used to mention that he should consult on shows depicting people on the spectrum because, as Michelle mentioned, characters often felt like characters. It is so awesome to see her in the room, not only as a talented writer, but also as an authentic voice. It seems like this team is not only a safe place, but an authentic one. Kudos to you all. That is not a question. That is not a question. But thank you. And Michelle, thank you.
Mm.
Thank you.
Here's another question. What was the greatest number of drafts written for any episode? What is your personal process for scene building? What is your process of building plot during the character-driven dynamic? So that makes up for the last question. That's
Three.
let's see, it all balances out. So let's see. Anybody want to tackle any of those questions? The greatest number of drafts written for any episode, your personal process for scene building, your process of building plot during the character-driven dynamic.
Well, I can speak to that a little further. I mean, for the whole room, in terms of crafting the story, we would approach it by sort of the character and what they were going to experience that episode. And we're in this is a top-down philosophy. We're pretty detailed by the time a writer goes off to write with knowing the content of the scene. We talk about it a lot in the room. It includes dialogue pitches, all kinds of things, but we would break it down by character and then see how we could make those stories talk to each other, because it felt like it was always firing at its finest when we had our three together. So that process was all done in the room on a board, and we were in a room just like this, a virtual room, with a virtual board that we were all looking at the same time. So that's that part of it.
Yeah.
And it's all just one draft because Jason doesn't do any rewrite. So
Oh, perfect.
it was just, they're all perfect, right? That was it.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the drafts of the drafts, it really is just like doing a show, a television show is it's an ongoing, continuing process that begins in the room. And I always say, like, when we do our job correctly in the room, that what you sort of see on the screen is going to be like 80% what was in the room. But there is an ongoing process, because as you're going through making a show, it's collaborative. It's a collaborative form. So you're going to have changes that come from all different kinds of places. From the network will give you notes. The producer will be like, well, we can't shoot here. Can we shoot here? Or this is too many scenes, or this blah, blah, blah. The director will have great insight as well. The actors as well. So, you're constantly refining as you go. And you're also refining not from what anybody is asking you to do, but as you're watching the episodes being shot and you're watching what the actors are doing, it informs, in much more detail who these people are. And, sometimes I've had some experiences where, not really on this show, but because this show, is only 8 episodes and goes so fast, but I have episodes where I just be sitting there watching a cut, and like on shows like Parenthood or Friday Night Lights, where there's like a million characters. And I remember thinking, I just want to see that person in a scene with that person. People who had no business to be in each other's scenes, but like, I just had a feeling from it. And then I would write that, and that would become a storyline. And so, it's an ongoing process.
One thing to add too, I think, just because I think this is, as everybody, my first staffing experience and getting to be in a room with so many amazing of all of you. I think Ian and Kristin and Jason, especially because you've been doing it for so long, you don't realize how much everything that y'all do goes back immediately to character. So it's like, anytime we were breaking, like, where does plot come from? Where does all that come from? I feel like the very rare silences that were in the room, it was like, I feel like Jason, you'd always be like, okay, let's talk about their headspace and let's talk about what would come out of that headspace naturally and what would really happen. And so everything grew out of that, like that just so like honest, like this is their head and then all plot's coming from that instead of plot applying to the characters. And that was so educational and also like just an experience to be a part of and to get to see that on screen and feel like those characters were real because you guys do that so well.
I think that like, it's also like, you know, trying to keep ourselves, you know, honest. You know what I mean? Like it's such an impulse that never ends when you're writing to just, you know, because, you know, like basically writing the process, you know, you're sort of terrified, you know, it's like so hard. You're starting with nothing. What kind of job is it where you start with nothing, blank sheet of paper? So it's just comes out of terror. And because you're so terrified, you just want you want to make the things happen that you think should happen. So if you know, like, you know, the character has to get from here to here in the scene, you want them to get there, but it's keeping yourself honest and just not have the other character say something false in order to have your character say what you need them to say. Like that question of what would really happen is definitely like the mantra that we use to keep ourselves honest, you know, like if something starts to bump, like, oh yeah, that's great. But like, why did that person say that? Why did that person do that? And that is, to me, such a key, because I do feel like, you know, the writer's room is like, you know, such a place where, you know, I always say like, you know, when you're in the writer's room and like, you know, when we pitch the stories to each other and pitch the episodes, once we think they're done, it's like, I always say, like, if something is bumping when you're pitching it in the room, you're going to feel that same way in the editing room if you don't fix it when it's in the room. It's going to be there forever. It will plague you. It's not going to be like, oh yeah, don't worry about it. We have these great actors. You know, that's the writer's room is this place where we really have to be, you know, honest with each other and honest with ourselves and make sure that we're, you know, these stories are, you know, really working.
Well, I will say, Jess, to yes and you, it's like on every show that we've been on with Jason, whenever we get stuck on anything and there's a pause, it always comes back to Jason being like, okay, what would actually happen? Let's just start there. It's like it's exactly right. And Kristin and I learned that in the same way you did on this, and that we totally do that in our own writing now.
Okay, so let me ask another couple of questions. We're getting we a lot of good questions coming in. So can the writers speak to the samples that they had on hand when they were being considered for the job? Jason, what qualities of the samples convince you that these writers are right for the job when you're building a room? Okay. So anybody want to answer that?
Yeah, I'll go. I had written a script that was inspired by my cousin Gabby, who has Rett syndrome. It's a neurological disorder. And it was through her perspective. She's nonverbal. And also through her family, like, and her just coming of age in her 20s. And when I had initially pitched the idea to an old rep, no longer, I had been told that it would be too depressing to like read about someone with a disability, and I was encouraged not to write it. And so I didn't call her for a few months and wrote it anyway. And then I felt like that's why I was stalking you. When I saw the announcement for this show, I just felt like it just spoke to me. And I felt like I was thinking about what I wanted to like put into the world. And it just really connected with what you were doing, Jason. So that was the sample that I wrote.
Yeah. I mean, that was really, that is a beautiful script. And I read that and I thought that was, you know, what I read that made me want to meet you and ultimately to have you as part of telling the story, because, you know, it had all it wasn't, you know, the exact subject matter of the show, but it had all of the qualities, all of the, you know, I think it was very honest, but there was also, you found so much humor in it. And it was also about, there was so much love in the story, and it was about family. And it did have, I do feel like sometimes, some things just have the ring of truth, and I think I sensed that story was something that was personal to you, in reading it. I feel like, with all of the, people that here, you wrote scripts that were, that moved me in some way. And that's what, well, Ian and Kristin, you didn't have to submit a script. I read your scripts anyway, but you didn't have to submit it. But in terms of everybody else, the stories really moved me. And I felt like whether or not it was, the stories were literally about this subject matter, it was like the characters that sort of came through and popped. Sometimes, like when you put together a room, you don't want to find writers who are writing exactly what you write. You want it to be people who are different, who have a different tone, who come from a different perspective, who bring things. That's the point of having a room. You don't want everybody to have the same point of view, but you do want to feel something. Like, you do want to feel connected when you read it, and you want to feel like, oh, I connect to this, because that's I think very informative about whether you're going to feel like you're going to work well with somebody in the room. So you really try in the room to sort of kind of put it together in such a way where we get lots of different perspectives. And that I would ask those questions. Some of the questions I asked today, what are the characters that you relate to in the show? Because basically I want to hear those characters, but I want to make sure when I get into the room, not everybody is focused on one character. This is an ensemble. We have to care as much about Harrison as we do about Jack and Violet, and for that matter, to Mandy and Van and Lou and everybody else. Because we need to love these. We need to love these characters. I mean, they're all, and that's what it is. And any other thing? Anybody else want to have something to say about that question?
Well, I mean, I'll just say it was the same for us with the script that got us on the Parenthood. Like we were going to write this big high concept thing, and we started it and we were like, it's feeling bogus. And instead we wrote this kind of, more 30-something, more personal type script. And our agents were like, we thought you were going to write the high concept one. We're like, yeah, this is better. And then when we sat down with you, Jason, you said, it feels like you wrote this sample only for this show. Like, and it did.
That's great. And then Jess, also you wrote a story that was a deeply personal story, and you said that you were, my assistant, before you were staffed on the show. I wasn't going to disclose that, but you did. And what I did want to disclose was that I had no intention of hiring you because you were my assistant and because you deserved it and you earned it in that way, because it wasn't about, to me, it's honestly not about that. You have to be you have to be somebody who, as a writer, who I feel will really contribute in a real way in the room. And you chose to write a script that was a deeply, deeply personal story. That, and I don't know if you want to talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it was, because when I was your assistant, which I wear with a badge of honor, I found out I had breast cancer. And I remember just it, not only like the amazingness of being a part of such an amazing team of writers while I was literally doing that, but I remember thinking how when I sat down to write the script, and I had a script about like a spy girl and all this stuff, but after working for you and being a part of the shows you're part of, how the honesty in reading samples that came across your desk or anything like that spoke so much about like taking the vulnerable parts of yourself and putting them on the page, and like your deepest trauma and putting that on a page, and like bringing hope into it. I feel like was like what I learned from you and then got to be a part. And so getting to tell those honest stories and feel like when you're writing a story that's honest, that that's the best way to showcase who you are as a writer and then things you want to work on. And getting to like, it's funny because I feel like in these rooms, it's like we all know, even though we've never met in person, I know like deep, dark secrets of everybody because like that's what all the storylines came out of. And so it's like a place to be honest and tell all the things that make us all human and the most vulnerable parts, and just put it in a script. And then there you go. That's your therapy.
Right.
Mhm.
Thank you. We should probably wrap up soon. I'll ask one or two more questions from that are here. It's such a powerful and heartfelt show. How important was it also to find the comedy, and how did that inform the writing process? Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, they always seem to go hand in hand in the room. It just felt like that came very naturally. I think it was Romi who said when our characters speak the truth, often that's the very source of the comedy. So it wasn't as if we were looking for ways, I think, to insert that. I think it just was pretty organic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like because I staffed on comedies before this show, and like the difference to me was on this show, you never just like write a joke to get a laugh. It was always, it just like was what they would say. Like you're saying, like Jess was saying, and you were saying, Jason, it's just like, what's real? What's the real response?
Right. I mean, one thing that I find about in general about shows, but in particular on this show, like I knew we were going to go to some places that were sort of harder places, that were places that were like, I wanted the show to be raw at certain times. And, some of the stuff that we talked about today, a little bit about Violet's journey and some stuff in Harrison's story and all of them, there were hard things that we didn't shy away from. And I think that the show has so much humor and is really so like sort of like entertaining, delightful. Honestly, it allows you to, it allows you then to go to places that are harder. And I think if we and I, had a deep sense of responsibility in telling this story. I mean, it's personal to me. I didn't want to, like do a fake-o version of it. I wanted to feel real and honest. And I felt like humor was actually like having the humor was very freeing to us as writers, by having these scenes that were really funny. And sometimes, moments that were lines that were laugh out loud funny, or just even some physical things that were so funny. I mean, it sort of gave you the courage to say, okay, but now we're also going to go to this place. And of course, the greatest thing is when those things are but right up against each other. When something is, you're laughing, then you find yourself, oh my God, emotional right away. And which is also so great. Okay, I think let me ask one last question. And then let's see if I can find one thing, and then we'll finish up. Okay. Okay. An oft quoted line in the autism community is, if you've met one individual with autism, you've met one individual with autism. Autism manifests itself in a wide variety of different ways with different people. This is represented very well on the show through 3 very different characters. How did you go about deciding how autism would manifest in the main trio? How much of this was informed by the Israeli original, representing a broad spectrum of the community, story needs, etc.? Sorry for the long question. Autistic, LOL. Okay. Anybody want to jump in? Michelle, did you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, in terms of how we manifested it, the thing that I love about this show is that it became our very own. The Israeli version is amazing, and with the different characters, but we really, took a lot of the seeds of it, which was 3 20-something-year-olds living together who are in different areas of the spectrum, and really made it our own in terms of bumping up the Mandy character and the Lou character and the Van character to kind of make it a truly ensemble show that shows what life is like, when you're neurodiverse, but also the people that are in neurodiverse people's lives. I enjoy shows that are adapted, from different places, but according to the marketplace, it shifts and it becomes its own identity and its own, story in a way. Shameless is one of my favorite shows. British Shameless, American Shameless, very different, great shows. So, that's how I feel about On the Spectrum and As We See It. Great shows, very different, but also seeds of what made the original so brilliant, as well as us adding our own personal stories into it, our own personal stamps, which every writer here has, in season 1, as well as hopefully future seasons.
Beautiful, Michelle. Thank you so much. Guys, thank you. This was really great. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you for saying mostly nice things about me. And thank you guys. This was really a wonderful experience, and hope to see you all soon. All right.
Jason.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.